La Jolla, California, November 5th, 1989. Sunday morning. The sun was rising over the Pacific Ocean, casting a golden glow on the multi-million-dollar mansions that line the coast. It is a place where life is supposed to be perfect. A place of manicured lawns, expensive cars, and families that look like they belong in a magazine advertisement. Inside one of these mansions, on Cypress Avenue, silence reigned. The master bedroom was dark, but at 5:30 a.m., that silence was shattered, not by the sound of the ocean, but by the sound of a .38 caliber revolver. 5 shots. In a matter of seconds, one of the most successful lawyers in California and his beautiful young wife lay dead. The shooter didn't run. She didn't hide. She stood there in the darkness, trembling, holding the smoking gun. She wasn't a burglar. She wasn't a stranger. She was the woman who had helped build this empire. She was the mother of the man's 4 children. She was the perfect wife who had been discarded like an old piece of furniture. Her name was Betty Broderick. And what happened in that room wasn't just a murder. It was the explosive finale of the 20-year war. A war fueled by love, betrayal, gaslighting, and the thirst for revenge that consumed an entire family. Tonight, we peel back the layers of the American dream to find the nightmare hiding underneath. We will explore the mind of a woman who gave everything to a man, only to be left with nothing except a gun. To understand the end, we must go back to the beginning. 1965, South Bend, Indiana. Elizabeth Betty Bisheglia was 17 years old. She was the kind of girl parents dreamed of. Beautiful, well-mannered, Catholic, and educated. She attended college for women and followed the rules. Then, she met Dan Broderick. Dan was a student at Notre Dame. He was smart, ambitious, and charming. He came from a large family, just like Betty. They seemed like a match made in heaven. When they got married in 1969, it was a fairy tale. Betty wore a stunning white gown. Dan wore a tuxedo. They looked at each other with the kind of hope that says, "We're going to conquer the world together." But the reality of their early marriage was far from glamorous. Dan had ambition, but he didn't have money. Not yet. He decided to go to medical school. Then, he decided to go to Harvard Law School. For years, Betty became the engine that kept the family running. She worked multiple jobs to support him. She sold Tupperware. She babysat. She taught elementary school. While Dan studied in the quiet of the library, Betty was changing diapers, cooking cheap meals, and stretching every dollar to make sure the bills were paid. She didn't mind. Why? Because it was an investment. She believed in the partnership. She believed that her sacrifice now would pay off later. She was building their future, brick by brick, with her own sweat. She bore him 4 children. She managed the household. She was the perfect corporate wife. And eventually, it paid off. By the late 1970s, the Brodericks had made it. Dan was a medical malpractice lawyer, a doctor and a lawyer combined. He was earning millions. They moved to La Jolla, California. They bought a mansion. They joined the country club. Betty finally had the life she had worked for. She was the queen of her castle. She had the jewelry, the clothes, the social status, but she didn't know that the castle was built on sand. The cracks began to appear. Dan Broderick hired a new legal assistant. Her name was Linda Kolkina. Linda was 21 years old, a former stewardess, beautiful, bright, and decades younger than Betty. At first, Betty didn't suspect anything. Why would she? She and Dan had been through poverty together. They had a history. But then, she started noticing things. Dan, who was usually a workaholic focused only on cases, began to change. He started dressing better. He bought expensive scarves. He lost weight. He started talking about Linda a lot. Linda is so smart, he would say. Linda is so funny. Betty's intuition, that primal instinct that every partner has, woke up. She asked Dan directly, "Are you having an affair with Linda?" Dan looked her in the eye and said, "No, you are crazy." This is where the story turns from a sad breakup into a psychological horror. For years, Dan didn't just cheat on Betty. He made her question her own sanity. Betty would find clues, a receipt for a lunch, a missing period of time. She would confront him, and every time, Dan would call her paranoid. He would call her hysterical. He told her she was imagining things. He even suggested she needed psychiatric help. This is called gaslighting. When someone denies your reality until you start to believe you are losing your mind. Betty became volatile. She screamed. She threw things. And to the outside world, she looked like the crazy wife, yelling at the calm, successful lawyer. Dan played the part of the victim perfectly. He was the patient husband dealing with an unstable woman. But behind closed doors, he was systematically dismantling her self-esteem while planning his exit. The truth comes out. Dan moved out of the house. He bought a new property. And who moved in with him? Linda Kolkina. Betty wasn't crazy. She was right all along. But there was no apology. Instead, there was a legal war. Dan Broderick was a lawyer. And not just any lawyer. He was one of the best in the state. He knew the law inside and out. Betty didn't stand a chance. The divorce proceedings were brutal. This became known as the worst divorce case in San Diego County history. Dan used his legal power to control Betty. He withheld money from her, forcing her to beg for monthly allowances. He obtained court orders to keep her away from his house. He gained custody of the children. Betty felt like she was being erased. The woman who had worked 2 jobs to put him through school was now being cast aside for a 21-year-old, and she was being painted as a monster in court. Betty didn't handle it with grace. She handled it with rage. She began a campaign of harassment. She left hundreds of obscene voicemails on Dan's answering machine. She drove her car into the front door of Dan's new house while the children were inside. She spray-painted the interior of the house they used to share. She burned Dan's custom-made suits in the backyard. Every time she lashed out, Dan would calmly document it. He would get a restraining order. He would fine her. He was playing chess, and she was flipping the board. He called her old, fat, and boring. Linda, the new girlfriend, reportedly mocked Betty too, sending her advertisements for weight loss creams and wrinkle treatments. It was cruelty on a massive scale. Betty sat alone in a smaller house, watching her former husband live the life she built, with a woman he claimed was just a friend. She felt robbed, not just of her husband, but of her time, her youth, her investment. The final straw. The divorce was finalized. Dan and Linda got married. Betty was not invited, obviously, but the wedding date felt like a final nail in the coffin. Dan hired security guards for the wedding, specifically to keep Betty out. He reportedly told them to shoot if she appeared. After the wedding, Dan and Linda sent Betty a photo of them, happy, smiling. And then, the legal letters continued. Dan was suing her again. He was trying to put her in jail for harassment. Betty felt backed into a corner. She felt that Dan would never stop until she was destitute or in prison. She told a friend, "He's going to kill me. He's taking everything." November 3rd, 1989. Betty received more legal papers from Dan. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. The rage that had been boiling for years began to cool into something solid, something cold. She bought a .38 caliber revolver months earlier. She said it was for protection, but on the night of November 4th, she put it in her purse. Sunday, November 5th, 1989. Betty drove her Chevrolet to Dan's mansion in Marston Hills. She had a key. Not a key that was given to her, but a key she had stolen from her daughter's purse weeks earlier. She parked the car. She walked up the stairs. The house was quiet. She entered the front door. She climbed the stairs to the master bedroom. She opened the door. There in the bed lay Dan and Linda, the new Mrs. Broderick. Linda stirred. She shouted, "Call the police." Dan moved. Betty raised the gun. She didn't hesitate. She fired 5 times. One bullet hit a bedside table. One hit the wall. One hit Linda in the neck and chest, killing her instantly. One hit Dan in the chest. Dan fell off the bed. His last words, according to Betty, were, "Okay, you shot me. I'm dead." Betty pulled the phone out of the wall, so he couldn't call for help. She walked out of the room. She got back in her car and drove away. It was over. The perfect life had ended in a pool of blood. The trial of Betty Broderick was a media sensation. It was the O.J. Simpson trial before O.J. Simpson. America was divided. On one side, people saw a cold-blooded double murderer. She executed a sleeping couple. She was bitter, vindictive, and dangerous. On the other side, thousands of women sent letters of support to Betty. They saw her as a tragic figure, a victim of emotional abuse, a woman who had been used up and thrown away by a powerful man who thought he could get away with anything. They called her an avenging angel for every discarded first wife in America. Betty took the stand. She was charming, articulate, but also erratic. She admitted to the shooting, but claimed she didn't plan it. She claimed she just wanted to talk, and then she snapped. She talked about the gaslighting. She talked about the years of lies. "I didn't have a life," she told the jury. "He took my life." The first trial ended in a hung jury. They couldn't agree, but in the second trial, the prosecution focused on her preparation, the stolen key, the disconnected phone. This wasn't passion, they argued. This was an execution. In 1991, Betty Broderick was found guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 32 years to life in prison. Betty Broderick is still in prison today. She has been denied parole multiple times. She is an old woman now. The beauty of 1965 is gone. The mansion is sold. The children have grown up, some visiting her, some refusing to speak to her. This story is a tragedy with no winners. Dan Broderick, for all his success, underestimated the rage of the woman he betrayed. He thought he could use the law to bully her into submission. He forgot that the law cannot stop a bullet. Linda Kolkina, a young woman who fell in love, paid the ultimate price for a war she inherited. And Betty, she got her revenge. She stopped Dan from enjoying his new life. But in doing so, she destroyed her own. She traded her freedom for a moment of satisfaction. It serves as a dark reminder to us all. Relationships end. Hearts break. But when bitterness is allowed to fester, when we hold onto the past with a grip of iron, it poisons everything. Revenge might taste sweet for a second, but the aftertaste lasts a lifetime. So, as the rain falls outside your window tonight, and you lay safe in your bed, let go of the anger. Let go of the grudges. Because the heaviest thing we can carry in this life is the past. Story 2. The wind cuts through the valleys of Woodland Park, Colorado, like a knife. It is a place of breathtaking beauty, where the Rocky Mountains touch the sky and the snow covers the secrets of the earth. But in November of 2018, the snow wasn't the only thing covering up the truth. Thanksgiving is supposed to be a time of warmth, a time for family, for turkey dinners, for gratitude. For 29-year-old Kelsey Berreth, it was supposed to be the beginning of a new chapter. She was a young mother, a pilot, a flight instructor who spent her days navigating the endless blue skies. She was grounded, responsible, the kind of woman who never missed a phone call and never left a text unanswered. She had a 1-year-old daughter, Kaylee, and she had a fiancé, Patrick Frazee, a man who looked like he stepped out of an old Western movie. A cowboy, a rancher, a man of few words. On Thanksgiving Day, surveillance cameras captured Kelsey walking into a Safeway grocery store. She was carrying her baby in a car seat. She wore a simple coat, her hair pulled back. She bought ingredients for a holiday dinner. She walked out of the store, the automatic doors sliding shut behind her. And just like that, she vanished. No one saw her get into a car. No one saw her leave town. She simply ceased to exist. For 10 days, her phone would send strange messages. Her location would ping hundreds of miles away. But Kelsey herself was gone. What the police would eventually uncover wasn't just a kidnapping. It wasn't a runaway bride. It was a conspiracy so dark, so cold, and so calculated that it shook the entire state of Colorado to its core. It is a story about a man who lived a double life, a mistress who made a deal with the devil, and a crime scene that was cleaned up with a level of precision that defies belief. Tonight, under the sound of the rain, we're going to walk through the snow. We're going to look behind the closed doors of a quiet mountain town, and we're going to find out what really happened to the girl who disappeared on Thanksgiving. To understand the darkness, we must first look at the light. Kelsey Berreth was, by all accounts, brilliant. She wasn't just a flight instructor. She was a woman who commanded respect. She was independent. She had moved from Washington to Colorado to be closer to Patrick Frazee, the father of her child. Patrick was different. He lived with his mother on a large, isolated ranch in Florissant, Colorado. He didn't live with Kelsey. They were engaged. They had a child together, but they lived in separate houses miles apart. To their friends, it seemed untraditional, but fine. Patrick was a man of the land. He shod horses. He tended to cattle. He projected an image of a rugged, hard-working American cowboy. But beneath the cowboy hat and the stoic silence, Patrick was hiding a massive secret. While he was playing the role of the devoted fiancé to Kelsey, he was living a completely different life with another woman in another state. Her name was Crystal Lee, an old flame from Idaho, a nurse, a mother herself. For months, Patrick had been telling Crystal terrible lies. He told her that Kelsey was abusive. He told her that Kelsey was a danger to his daughter. He painted a picture of a monster, manipulating Crystal's emotions, grooming her for something terrible. He wasn't just complaining about his relationship. He was recruiting an accomplice. He famously told Crystal, "Someone needs to make her disappear." At first, Crystal thought he was venting, but then the request became specific. He asked her to get drugs to poison Kelsey's coffee. He asked her to get a metal bat. He was planting the seeds of murder, watering them with manipulation, waiting for them to grow. And Kelsey, she had no idea. She was buying sweet potatoes at Safeway, planning a dinner for the man who was actively plotting her death. November 22nd, 2018, Thanksgiving Day. Patrick Frazee arrived at Kelsey's townhouse in the afternoon. He told police later that they had a nice dinner, that he picked up their daughter, and that he left. He said that when he left, Kelsey was fine, but looking back, the clues were there. Usually, Kelsey texted her mother every single day. They were best friends. But on November 23rd, the text stopped coming from Kelsey's voice. Instead, her mother received text messages that felt robotic, cold. One message from Kelsey's phone to her boss at the flight school read, "I will not be in next week. Do not call me." Another message to Patrick read, "I'm going to Grandma's house to sort things out." But there was a problem. Kelsey's grandmother didn't know she was coming. Kelsey didn't pack a bag. Her cars were still in the driveway. Her toothbrushes were still in the bathroom. The cinnamon rolls she bought for breakfast were left untouched on the counter, stale and cold. And then, a digital mystery. 3 days after she disappeared, Kelsey's phone pinged. But it didn't ping in Colorado. It pinged nearly 800 miles away, in Gooding, Idaho. How could Kelsey be in Idaho while her cars were in Colorado? Was she kidnapped? Did she run away? Her mother, Cheryl, knew in her gut that something was wrong. Kelsey would never leave her daughter Kaylee behind. Never. Cheryl called the police and reported her daughter missing. "She's not the kind to run off," Cheryl told the dispatcher, her voice trembling, "and she hasn't called me." The police went to Patrick. They asked him the standard questions. "Where is she? When did you last see her?" Patrick didn't seem worried. He didn't join the search parties. He didn't post flyers. He stood on his ranch, arms crossed, and told the cameras, "I just want her home." But his eyes were dead. He referred to Kelsey in the past tense. The investigators noticed something else. The smell of bleach. Not at his house, but the lingering scent of a cleanup that hadn't quite faded. Police focused on the phone ping in Idaho. It led them straight to a name, Crystal Lee. When the FBI knocked on Crystal's door, she was terrified. She initially denied knowing anything. She said she hadn't seen Patrick in months. But the FBI had the receipts. They had cell tower data. They knew she had been in Colorado on Thanksgiving weekend. They offered her a deal. "Tell us the truth. Tell us where Kelsey is, and we will take the death penalty off the table." Crystal Lee broke down, and the story she told was more horrific than anyone had imagined. She told them that on Thanksgiving Day, Patrick called her. He didn't say, "Happy Thanksgiving." He said 3 chilling words. "You have a mess to clean up." He wasn't asking. He was commanding. Crystal got in her car and drove 12 hours through the night, from Idaho to Colorado. She brought bleach. She brought trash bags. She brought a suit to cover her clothes. She knew exactly what she was driving into. When Crystal arrived at Kelsey's townhouse, Patrick was gone. He was at his ranch, having Thanksgiving dinner with his family, acting like nothing happened. Crystal entered Kelsey's home, the home of a missing mother. To the naked eye, it looked okay, but Crystal knew what to look for. Patrick had told her what he did. He had blindfolded Kelsey with a sweater, telling her they were going to play a game to guess the scent of different candles. A cruel, twisted game of trust. While she was blindfolded, sitting in her own living room, trusting the father of her child, he struck. He used a baseball bat. I won't go into the graphic details, but it was brutal. It was personal. Crystal's job was to erase him from the scene. She spent 4 hours scrubbing. She described cleaning blood from the hardwood floor cracks with a toothbrush. She cleaned the walls. She cleaned the ceiling. She gathered the blood-soaked items, the children's toys that were in the way, the cinnamon rolls. She packed everything into black trash bags. She was the cleaner. She told police that Patrick had taken Kelsey's body away in a black plastic tote box, a storage bin. He put the mother of his child in a box, put the box in his truck, and drove her to his ranch. But the most heartbreaking detail? Crystal said that after she finished cleaning, she looked around the room one last time to make sure she missed nothing. She saw a small spot of blood on a baby gate. She wiped it away. She realized that the baby, little Kaylee, had likely been in the house in a playpen while her mother was taken from this world. Crystal didn't stop there. She told police that she and Patrick took the trash bags and the black tote to his ranch. In the freezing cold of the Colorado night, they lit a fire. They burned the evidence. They burned Kelsey's purse. They burned the bat. And they burned the tote. Patrick Frazee thought fire would destroy everything. He thought he had committed the perfect crime. No body, no weapon, no witness except a woman he thought he controlled completely. But he made a mistake. When the police searched his property months later, investigating the burned pile, they found something the fire couldn't destroy. Deep in the hardened ash, they found a tooth. And they found fragments of plastic from the tote. DNA analysis confirmed it. It was Kelsey. He hadn't just killed her. He had tried to erase her existence from the earth. The text messages from Kelsey's phone, Crystal admitted she sent them. She took Kelsey's phone back to Idaho with her and turned it on specifically to create a digital trail leading away from Patrick. The trial of Patrick Frazee was intense. Crystal Lee took the stand. She was the star witness. The defense tried to paint her as the mastermind, a jealous lover who killed her rival. But the evidence, the surveillance of Patrick, the cell tower data, the tooth in the fire, pointed to one man. Patrick sat in the courtroom, stone-faced, the cowboy who thought he was smarter than everyone else. The man who thought he could manipulate two women to their destruction. The jury didn't buy his silence. It took them only a few hours to convict him. Patrick Frazee was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 156 years. He will die in a concrete cell, far away from the open skies and the mountains he claimed to love. Crystal Lee served a short sentence for tampering with evidence, a plea deal that many found controversial, but without her testimony, the truth might have remained buried in the snow forever. Kelsey Berreth's daughter is now growing up with her grandparents. She is safe. She is loved. But she will grow up knowing that her mother was a hero who loved her, and her father was a shadow who betrayed them both. This story is a reminder of the masks people wear. Patrick Frazee was the polite neighbor, the hard-working rancher, the perfect fiancé. But inside, there was a darkness that no one saw until it was too late. So, as you lay in bed tonight, listening to the rain, remember Kelsey. Remember the young pilot who loved the sky. And remember that sometimes, the most dangerous storms aren't the ones outside our windows. They are the ones sitting at our dinner tables. Story 3. Tampa, Florida, 1984. To the tourists, it was a city of sunshine, palm trees, and endless beaches. But to the locals, in the autumn of that year, the city had turned into a place of shadows. There was a monster hunting in the darkness. Women were disappearing. Bodies were turning up in orange groves and remote dirt roads. The police were desperate. The media was in a frenzy. But amidst this reign of terror, there's one story that stands apart. It is not just the story of a victim. It is the story of a warrior. Imagine being 17 years old. Imagine being blindfolded, bound, and held captive by a man who has already killed 10 women before you. Most people would freeze. Most would panic. But Lisa McVeigh didn't freeze. In the darkest 26 hours of her life, she decided that she wasn't going to be just another body found in the woods. She decided that if she was going to die, she would make sure her killer died too. She turned her mind into a weapon. She memorized the texture of the carpet. She counted the seconds between traffic lights. She left her own DNA in places he wouldn't look. This is the story of a girl who planted the seeds of her own revenge while staring death in the face. Tonight, under the sound of the rain, we follow the incredible journey of Lisa McVeigh, the girl who memorized evil and used it to destroy a monster. November 3rd, 1984. Lisa McVeigh was a resilient teenager. Life hadn't been kind to her. She worked at a Krispy Kreme donut shop, trying to save money, trying to build a future for herself. She was used to taking care of herself. It was a rainy night, the kind of rain that blurs the streetlights and makes the road slick and dark. At around 2 a.m., Lisa finished her shift. She clocked out, tired but ready to go home. She got on her bicycle. It was her only way of transport. She began to pedal through the quiet streets of Tampa. The rain soaked her uniform. The rhythmic sound of the tires on the wet asphalt was the only noise accompanying her. She didn't know that she was being watched. A car pulled up behind her, a large maroon vehicle. Suddenly, she was cut off. A man jumped out. Before she could scream, before she could even process what was happening, she was pulled from her bike. A blindfold was forced over her eyes. A gun was pressed to her head. "Don't scream," a voice growled, "or you die right here." She was thrown into the floorboard of the car. The darkness was total. The smell of the car interior, old upholstery and stale cigarettes, filled her nose. As the car sped away, leaving her bicycle spinning its wheel on the lonely road, Lisa made a choice. She stopped crying. She started thinking. Most victims in this situation lose their sense of time and direction. It's a natural trauma response. But Lisa did something extraordinary. She realized that if she ever got out of this, or even if her body was found, she needed to leave a map for the police. Lying on the floor of the car, blindfolded, she focused on her other senses. She felt the car turn left, then right. She counted the seconds. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. She felt the car stop. She heard the sound of a plane overhead. It was loud. She deduced she must be near the airport. When they arrived at the location, an apartment building, she was dragged up a flight of stairs. She didn't just walk. She counted. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. She memorized the number of stairs leading to the door. Inside the apartment, the horror truly began. For 26 hours, she was held captive by a man named Bobby Joe Long. He was a predator of the worst kind. He assaulted her repeatedly. He terrorized her with his gun. But even during the assault, Lisa was fighting back. Not with her fists, but with her brain. She realized that to survive, she had to humanize herself. She had to make him see her as a person, not an object. She asked him questions. "Are you lonely?" she asked. "Why are you doing this?" She played into his ego. She told him she could be his girlfriend. She cooked for him. She acted compliant. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She was de-escalating a serial killer. While she was gaining his trust, she was planting evidence. This is the part of the story that makes Lisa a genius. When he allowed her to go to the bathroom, she took off her blindfold for a split second. She saw the bathroom. She touched everything. She pressed her fingertips firmly against the glass of the shower door. She pressed them against the toilet handle. She wiped her hair on the carpet to leave DNA. She was essentially signing her name all over his crime scene. At one point, he turned on the television. Lisa couldn't see the screen, but she listened. Magnum P.I. was playing. She memorized the episode. She memorized the time. Later, he turned on the radio. She focused on the announcers. She memorized the station call sign and the specific song that was playing. Then, she did something incredibly risky. She was sitting on a chair, blindfolded. She reached down discreetly and felt the carpet. It wasn't normal carpet. It was shag carpet, thick and long. But she noticed something else. There was a stain, a sticky, hardened patch on the carpet near the chair. She memorized exactly where that stain was relative to the door. She told herself, I am going to remember everything. You think you own me, but I am studying you. After hours of terror, Bobby Joe Long did something he had never done with his previous victims. He decided to let her go. Why? Because Lisa had convinced him. She had looked him in the eye, under the blindfold, and promised him that she wouldn't tell anyone. She told him that she had a bad life too, that she understood him. She lied to him so perfectly that he believed her. He drove her to a remote location. On the drive, she continued her work. She memorized the turns. She memorized the stops. He stopped the car in a dark, wooded area. He pushed her out. Don't take off the blindfold until I'm gone, he warned. If you tell the police, I know where you live. I will come back and kill everyone you love. He drove away. Lisa ripped off the blindfold. She was alive. She ran. She ran until her lungs burned. She found a house and pounded on the door. Help me. I've been taken. The tragedy of Lisa's story didn't end with her escape. When she finally got to the police, tired, bruised, and traumatized, they were skeptical. You see, Lisa had a history of running away from home due to a difficult family life. The police thought she was making it up for attention. They thought she had just stayed out all night with a boyfriend and concocted a wild story to avoid trouble. Can you imagine the frustration? After surviving a serial killer, the people meant to protect you don't believe you. But Lisa refused to give up. She kept repeating the details. Red carpet in the car. Steps leading to the apartment. The sound of the planes. Magnum P.I. on the TV. Finally, her case landed on the desk of a detective who listened. His name was Larry. He realized that the details Lisa was providing were too specific to be invented. And more importantly, he realized they matched the profile of the classified ad rapist and the serial killer they had been hunting for months. Lisa sat down with the sketch artist, but she didn't just describe a face. She described an environment. She told them about the car, a Dodge Magnum, specifically a Dodge Magnum with a red interior. She told them about the digital clock in the car that glowed green. The police ran a check. Vehicles matching that description in the Tampa area. The list narrowed down. And then one name popped up, Bobby Joe Long. November 16, 1984. 2 weeks after the abduction, a surveillance team was watching Bobby Joe Long. They saw him driving the car, the red Dodge Magnum. They watched him enter a movie theater. They arrested him as he walked out. When they interrogated him, he was arrogant. He denied everything. He thought he was smarter than the police. But he didn't account for Lisa McVeigh. The police obtained a warrant to search his apartment. When the detectives walked in, they froze. It was exactly as Lisa had described it. It was like walking into a memory she had painted for them. They looked at the stairs outside. They counted them. The number matched Lisa's count perfectly. They looked at the carpet. Shag carpet. They looked for the stain near the chair. It was there. They dusted the bathroom for prints. And there, on the shower door, clear as day, was Lisa McVeigh's fingerprint. But the final nail in the coffin? Lisa had told them that he used an ATM machine during the drive to release her. The police checked his pockets. They found an ATM receipt. The timestamp on the receipt matched the timeline Lisa had given them. The breadcrumbs she had left behind turned into chains that bound him. Bobby Joe Long was charged not just with Lisa's abduction, but thanks to the evidence found in his car, fibers and hairs matching other victims, he was connected to at least 10 murders. Lisa was the only one who survived. She was the key to unlocking a mountain of cold cases. The trial was the moment of ultimate revenge. Lisa stood in the courtroom. She was no longer the scared girl on the floorboard of a car. She was the witness for the prosecution. She looked at Bobby Joe Long, the man who told her he would kill her if she spoke. She pointed at him. She spoke clearly. She detailed every minute of those 26 hours. Her testimony was devastating. It dismantled his defense. Bobby Joe Long was found guilty. He was sentenced to death. But the story doesn't end there. Most people would want to forget. Lisa wanted to protect. The experience changed her. She realized she had a gift for observation, for survival, and for justice. Years later, Lisa McVeigh did something incredible. She walked into the police academy. She didn't just survive the darkness. She joined the force that fights it. Lisa became a specialized deputy sheriff, focusing on sex crimes and protecting children. For decades, she used her own trauma to help other victims, to catch other predators. In May 2019, 35 years after that rainy night in Tampa, justice was finally served. Bobby Joe Long was executed by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison. Lisa McVeigh, now a grown woman, a mother, and a grandmother, was there. She sat in the front row. She watched the life leave the eyes of the monster who tried to take hers. She said later, "I wanted to look him in the eye. I wanted him to know that I was still here, that I won." Lisa's revenge wasn't violent. It was the revenge of a life well lived. She took the worst thing that could happen to a person and turned it into a shield for others. She proved that while you can bind a person's hands and you can blindfold their eyes, you can never truly lock up the human spirit. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep safe in your bed, remember Lisa. Remember that even in the darkest room, the mind can be a light. And remember that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the world isn't a gun, it's a memory. Story 4. We all have a routine before we go to sleep. We turn off the lights. We check the stove. And most importantly, we lock the front door. It is a ritual that gives us peace. It tells our brain, you are safe now. The world is outside and you are inside. But for the women of Northern California, in the darkness of the 1990s and early 2000s, that lock was a lie. There was a man who didn't care about locks. A man who moved like smoke. A man who could turn the safest place on earth, your own bedroom, into a cage. They called him the NorCal Rapist. For 15 years, he was a ghost story whispered in 6 different counties. He struck when the moon was hidden. He wore a mask. He tied his victims up and stole not just their possessions, but their dignity. And then he would vanish. No fingerprints, no face, just the lingering smell of fear. For nearly 3 decades, he lived a normal life. He walked among his victims. He went to work. He had barbecues with neighbors. He thought he had gotten away with it. He thought his secrets were buried in the past, but he forgot one thing. He forgot that the future was coming, and in the future, even the smallest drop of sweat can scream a name. Tonight, settle in. Lock your doors. Double-check them if you have to, because we're going to tell the story of the hunt for Roy Charles Waller, the monster who hid in plain sight, and the revolutionary science that finally dragged him into the light. Rohnert Park, California, 1991. It was a quiet night in a quiet condo. A young woman, let's call her Sarah, was asleep. The sliding glass door to her balcony was closed, but perhaps not secured as tightly as it should have been. She woke up not to a noise, but to a presence. A figure standing at the foot of her bed, dressed in dark clothing, a mask covering his face, a gun in his hand. Before she could scream, he was on her. His voice was calm, controlled. This wasn't a frenzy. This was a procedure. He bound her hands. He covered her eyes. For hours, he terrorized her in her own home. He searched through her belongings. He took small items, jewelry, cash, souvenirs of his control. And then he did something strange, something that would become his signature. He went to the kitchen. He drank juice. He ate food from her refrigerator. It was an act of ultimate dominance. He was saying, I am comfortable here. This is my house now. When he finally left, slipping back into the night, Sarah managed to free herself. She called the police. But when they arrived, there was almost nothing to find. He was careful. He wore gloves. He didn't leave chaotic DNA evidence behind, or so they thought at the time. The police filed the report. They looked for suspects, but Rohnert Park went back to sleep. They didn't know that this wasn't a one-time event. It was the dress rehearsal for a reign of terror. Over the next 15 years, the Phantom moved. Sonoma County, Solano County, Contra Costa, Yolo. He didn't stay in one town. He treated Northern California like his personal hunting ground. The pattern was always terrifyingly similar. He targeted Asian women, though not exclusively. He attacked late at night. He always gained entry through a window or a sliding door. He would bind the women. Sometimes he would bind their boyfriends or husbands too, forcing them to listen from another room while he assaulted their partner. Imagine that horror, the feeling of total helplessness. But the police were struggling. Why? Because the crimes were happening in different jurisdictions. In 1996, the Vallejo police were looking for a rapist. In 2000, the Davis police were looking for a rapist. In the days before centralized digital databases, nobody realized that the Vallejo rapist and the Davis rapist were the same man. He was evolving. He was getting smarter. He started bringing his own equipment, duct tape, zip ties. He would talk to the victims. Sometimes he apologized. Sometimes he threatened. He was a psychological puzzle that no one could solve. And in every house, he took something. A necklace here, a ring there. Not to pawn them for money, but to keep them. Trophies of his conquest. By 2006, the attack stopped. The NorCal rapist simply retired. The victims were left with their trauma. The police were left with cold files. And the man behind the mask? He went on with his life. Who was he? While the police were hunting a monster, Roy Charles Waller was building a life that looked painfully ordinary. He wasn't a drifter. He wasn't living in a van down by the river. Roy Waller was a safety specialist. The irony is sickening. He worked at the University of California, Berkeley. His job was to ensure safety protocols were followed. He walked the halls of a prestigious university, respected by colleagues, trusted with responsibilities. He was married. He lived in a nice house in Benicia, California. He had a garden. He paid his taxes. To his neighbors, Roy was a bit quiet, maybe a little awkward, but harmless. He was just a regular guy. One neighbor would later say, he never caused any trouble. This is the scary part of true crime. We expect monsters to look like monsters. We expect them to have jagged teeth and wild eyes. But Roy Waller wore glasses. He wore polo shirts. He looked like an accountant or a high school teacher. During the day, he managed safety reports. At night, he drove hundreds of miles to hunt women. How does a human mind compartmentalize that? How do you eat dinner with your wife on Tuesday and tie up a stranger on Wednesday? Psychologists call it distinct compartmentalization. Roy Waller didn't see himself as a criminal. He likely saw his night activities as a separate hobby, completely disconnected from his real life. And because he stopped in 2006, he probably thought he had won. He thought the clock had run out. But he didn't account for the rise of genetic genealogy. Fast forward to 2018. The world had changed. The Golden State Killer, Joseph DeAngelo, had just been caught using a revolutionary new technique. Police investigators realized that DNA databases like Cody's, the FBI database, were limited. They only contained the DNA of known criminals. If a rapist had never been arrested for a felony before, his DNA wouldn't be in the system. But millions of innocent people were spitting into tubes and sending their DNA to websites like Ancestry.com and 23andMe to find their long-lost cousins. Investigators realized, we don't need the killer's DNA to be in the database. We just need his third cousin's DNA. Detective Avis Beery, a relentless investigator who refused to let the NorCal rapist case die, decided to try this new method. She gathered the biological evidence preserved from multiple crime scenes over the last 20 years. They created a genetic profile of the rapist, and they uploaded it to a public genealogy database called GeneMatch. They waited. The computer algorithms scanned millions of profiles, and then a hit. Not Roy Waller, but a relative, a distant cousin. This is where the detective work becomes like a puzzle. Genealogists took that distant cousin and started building a family tree. They went backward in time. Who were the great-grandparents? Then they moved forward. Who were the children? Who moved to California? Who fits the age description? Branch by branch, they pruned the tree. They looked at birth certificates, high school yearbooks, marriage licenses. Finally, the tree narrowed down to one single branch, one name, Roy Charles Waller. He was 58 years old, living in Benicia, but they couldn't just arrest him based on a family tree. They needed his DNA to confirm it 100%. The police set up surveillance. They watched the safety specialist go about his day. They waited for him to discard something. A coffee cup, a straw, a piece of gum. They managed to retrieve a discarded item. They rushed it to the lab. The tension in that lab must have been suffocating. When the results came back, it was a perfect match. The DNA found at crime scenes in 1991, 1996, and 2006 was the DNA of Roy Charles Waller. September 2018. Roy Waller arrived at work at UC Berkeley, just like any other day. But this time, he was met by a team of officers. He was handcuffed. He looked confused, almost offended. He denied everything. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. But the evidence in his house would scream the truth. When police searched his home and his storage lockers, they found something that chilled them to the bone. They didn't just find a gun. They didn't just find duct tape. They found the trophies. jewelry, IDs, personal items belonging to victims from attacks that happened 20 years ago. He had kept them, carefully stored. Why? To relive the memories, to touch a necklace and remember the fear he caused. It was the collection of a predator, and now it was the evidence that would bury him. The trial began in 2020. It was emotional. For the first time, the victims, now older, stronger women, gathered in the same room. They saw the man who had haunted their nightmares. But he wasn't a ghost anymore. He was just a balding, paunchy man in a suit, sitting at a defense table. Roy Waller's defense was weak. The DNA was irrefutable. But the most powerful moments came from the victim impact statements. One survivor stood up, looked him in the eye, and said, "You took my sense of safety. You took my home. But you did not take my life. And you will not take my future." The jury didn't hesitate. They found him guilty on 46 counts. Rape, kidnapping, sodomy. The judge, looking at the sheer volume of pain this man had caused, decided to send a message. He didn't give him 20 years. He didn't give him life. He sentenced Roy Charles Waller to 897 years to life in state prison. Basically, the judge was saying, "You will never, ever, under any circumstances, breathe free air again." Roy Waller is now rotting in a cell in California. He will die there. His name will be forgotten, but the science that caught him is only getting stronger. Story 5. Imagine a small, gray police interrogation room. The walls are cold. The air is stale. Inside, a 21-year-old girl sits alone. Just hours earlier, she stood over the body of the man she claimed to love and pulled the trigger not once, not twice, but 6 times. You would expect tears. You would expect her to be shaking with trauma. You would expect her to have her head in her hands, regretting the moment that ended 2 lives. But when the detectives left the room and the hidden cameras kept rolling, she didn't cry. Instead, she stood up. She checked her reflection in the glass. And then, in a moment that would terrify millions of people around the world, she started to dance. She pirouetted around the room like a ballerina, humming a tune, while the blood of her boyfriend was still drying on her hands. This isn't a scene from a horror movie. This is the disturbing true story of Shayna Hubers, the brilliant student, the obsessed lover, and the woman who decided that if she couldn't have him, no one could. Tonight, settle in, pull the covers up, and let's walk into the shadows of Highland Heights, Kentucky. To understand how this nightmare ended, we have to understand how it began. On the surface, it looked like a fairy tale. Ryan Poston was 29 years old. He was successful. He was handsome. He had just opened his own law firm and had a bright political future ahead of him. He was the kind of man who lit up a room when he walked in. Then he met Shayna on Facebook. She was 21, an honors student in psychology. She was incredibly intelligent, articulate, and beautiful. It seemed like the perfect match, a power couple in the making. But friends and family noticed something wrong almost immediately. While Ryan was looking for a partner, Shayna was looking for a possession. Her love wasn't warm, it was suffocating. She didn't just want to be with him. She wanted to consume him. She would send him hundreds of text messages in a single day. If he didn't reply instantly, she would send 50 more. If he still didn't answer, she would get in her car, drive to his condo, and stand outside his door, waiting in the dark, just watching. Ryan told his friends he was exhausted. He told his family he was afraid. He made a chilling prediction to his stepfather just weeks before his death. He said, "If I try to leave her for good, she's going to kill me." He knew the danger, but he didn't know the clock was ticking. The date was October 12th, 2012. It was supposed to be the first day of Ryan's new life. He had finally gathered the courage to end things with Shayna permanently, and there was a specific reason for his newfound confidence. He had met someone else. Her name was Audrey Bolt, and she wasn't just any girl. She was the former Miss Ohio, a beauty queen. Ryan was ecstatic. He told his family he was finally happy. He put on his best suit. He was ready to meet Audrey for a date that night. He was ready to leave the drama behind. But Shayna found out, and for a narcissist, being left is hard. But being left for a beauty queen, that was an insult she couldn't survive. She showed up at his apartment that evening, uninvited. Ryan let her in, likely hoping to calm her down one last time before his date. Neighbors later reported hearing voices, but they didn't hear screaming. They didn't hear a fight. It was strangely calm, until the silence was broken. Shayna picked up one of Ryan's handguns from the table. Ryan was sitting down, defenseless. Perhaps he thought she was bluffing. Perhaps he thought she just wanted to scare him. She fired. The first bullet struck him, but she didn't stop. She fired again, and again. In total, 6 shots rang out in that quiet apartment. Forensic evidence later revealed a detail that turned the jury's blood cold. The final shot, the 6th bullet, was fired when Ryan was already lying on the floor, helpless and dying. She walked over, stood above him, and fired directly into his face. It was the ultimate act of erasure. She didn't just want to kill him. She wanted to destroy the face that was about to smile at another woman. After the silence returned, she called 911. Her voice on the phone was shaky. She played the part perfectly. She claimed self-defense. She claimed he attacked her. She claimed she had no choice. But the police saw through the cracks. There were no defensive wounds on her. The apartment wasn't messy. And then, there was her behavior at the station. This is the part of the story that haunts everyone who sees it. Alone in the interrogation room, thinking no one was watching, Shayna didn't act like a victim. She acted like a celebrity. She asked the police officers, "Did I do it?" "Yes, I did it." She laughed at her own jokes. She even looked at the detectives with a straight face and asked, "Is there Wi-Fi here? I want to check my phone." And then, the question that showed her true disconnect from reality. "Do you think anyone will want to marry me now that I killed my boyfriend?" She wasn't worried about Ryan. She was worried about her relationship status. The trial was long. Shayna tried to outsmart the lawyers. She tried to use her psychology degree to manipulate the jury. But the evidence of that night, the 6 shots, the dancing, the lack of remorse, was too loud to ignore. She was sentenced to life in prison. Ryan Poston never made it to his date with Miss Ohio. He never argued his first big case. He remains frozen in time, a young man who simply wanted to be happy. His story is a dark reminder. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing in the world isn't a monster under the bed. It's the person who says, "I love you," but means, "I own you." As the rain continues to fall outside, and the world goes quiet, remember that you are safe. You are alone in the comfort of your room. The past cannot hurt you here. Take a deep breath. Let the story fade into the sound of the rain.